So the first things first is that whether you're a software developer, you're a UX person, or you're a product manager, or you're a project manager, see yourself as an innovator. So you need to understand or be grounded in that knowledge that you're an innovator. And then you see compliance, anybody who works in compliance, as a regulator. So naturally, those two, you would know from the history of innovation and regulation that they've never seen eye to eye. They've never been best of friends. But the few times where they have come together to work together, you've seen that successfully made the world a fantastic place for some of us living today. So, going straight to the question, I would say from my experience and currently in an insurtech industry with Axam Mansard that is heavily regulated, and of course also in the fintech space, which I know there is also a lot of regulation. It's always best you carry along your compliance people or everything that has to do with compliance or regulation throughout the entire product life cycle, but especially you need to factor them in from the planning phase because that gives you a better perspective into your planning. It helps you to know or to sort of have a very good idea of how you are going to or what would be required throughout the phases. And of course, again, because you are agile and you also want to go with the Scrum approach in most cases, it then makes it easier for you to know all the things that regulation or compliance would need from you from the start so that you can then break them into chunks in a way that makes sense for you to hit them like checkpoints. I play video game a lot, right? I'm sure a lot of the developers and product managers we have here, you also are gamers. It helps you to see it in form of checkpoints. It then makes it easier for you to carry everything that compliance needs from you along. So to address the other part of the question, which speaks to what are those practical steps, I would say there are a couple of things that you need to then carry along or implement in your entire agile process. There are a couple of things like you have to then be able to ensure that you have certain checkpoints, like I mentioned earlier, where you then bring in compliance. So you have to treat compliance as projectitis sort of is part of the process. You don't see them separately or you don't see it separately because it's regulation. And it also helps to have this mindset that it's a partnership to get to the end of the journey. So you set up compliance checks at every point in time. You also ensure that before you even set up compliance checks, during your planning phase, you break down all the requirements, like do a work breakdown of everything that you want to do and then ensure that the things that compliance will require from you, you also break them down properly so that it then makes sense for you to be able to know at what points to pull out which, at what point to engage which, and at what point to align and do trade-offs. Because definitely you can't always, as an innovator, you can't always accept everything that compliance throws at you because you also have to worry about your customers. So it then makes it easier for you to be able to agree early on your trade-offs at every stage of your development cycle. And then there are a few other items that you can also do. But so far you ensure that you carry them along from the start and most likely throughout the development life cycle or project life cycle, then you can be able to break things down in the right chunks and then set up the required checks and balances along the way to ensure that you are compliant. This is an interesting question. I think firstly, let me try by speaking directly to the PMs in the house, right? Kindly, I'm sure we know ourselves, right? But again, not just speaking only to the PMs, I mean to everybody generally, but majorly to PMs. Venn diagrams helps you. You see, Venn diagrams are applicable all across life generally. So why did I bring up the Venn diagram? You get to find out that even product management as a profession, in terms of conceptualization, came across from working with Venn diagrams, where as a product manager, as a PM, you sit in between somewhere. We sit between the business and the tech. But again, we also sit between several other overlapping professions in the team. So what that means in a nutshell is that we as product managers are the, let me say, the glue that must keep everybody together. Or okay, if you do a bit of domestic electronics and all that, you know what you call masking tape that holds, that holds everybody together. And what does that mean essentially? It means everything that has to do with working together on on a project, of course, to build the products, right? And to ensure that we ship the right product to the customer. And also that has to do with communication. So the best way to facilitate all this, your work as a product manager, is to ensure that there is effective communication and understanding across all the team. So what that means is, if you are working with compliance, you have to ensure that you are clearly communicating with developers that, see, developers, we are not just interested in the business, we are not just in the business of creating fantastic technology, but creating fantastic technology for the purpose of a string of wows without guidance, without regulation, doesn't help. So we need to carry along compliance, because you know the value of being compliant. You avoid fines, you avoid all these things. And especially for an industry, fintech and insurtech, that are heavily regulated, you don't want to be dealing with the headache of fines at the end of launching a beautiful product, or maybe launching it 3 or 4 months down the line, or 6 months or 9 months down the line, or a whole year down the line. You're not paying heavy fines. So what you have to do as a product manager, ensure that you communicate well to all the teams that you're working with, developers and the entire agile team or scrum team. Ensure that they understand the value of infusing compliance from the get-go, so that it then makes it easier for you to plan and include compliance processes and everything in all your flows, your user flows. Ensure that it's there in all your engagements, sprint planning and everything. You are catering to that, so that your developers also, as a matter of being a part of that team, they can learn to keep a third eye, or a second eye, or no, a third eye sort of, uh, on compliance issues. So it then helps everybody throughout the entire process. So decision making process then becomes risk focused. So say for example, if I want to create a choice architecture for a customer to navigate through on my platform, which option would I best, or would it be best for me to nudge the customer towards, that would, number one, mean less risk to me, the owner of the product, but still give value to the customer? Some of these decision making thing, even with your UI UX, in your design process or design thinking, everything has to come into place, so that you really take that approach and ensure that you are fully compliant. So communication, effective communication, is key as a product manager to do for this. Ensure that everybody understands the value of compliance from the planning and throughout the process. Okay, I think I gave a hint of it in the last question I sort of answered when I mentioned something around your UI UX, even the way you design your choice architecture for the customer or for the user. So design as a whole doesn't speak to just UI UX or the UI user interface. It speaks to even your system architecture, the way you think through how your product comes out at the end of the day, and how it works both, especially at the back end, not just front end. That's what I'm saying in a nutshell. So what that means then is you have to also adopt what I call the compliance by design mindset or approach. That means whatever it is you want to build, or you're thinking to of implementing, there is a normal way that you would want to do it as an innovator, as a product manager. We want to do it to please the customer. But apart from just thinking through that way, maybe going forward, what you then want to do is to also adopt another pattern of then thinking compliance by design. So you find, if you do it the normal way that you normally would do it, then replicate that and then infuse elements of compliance into that your design. So be it your flowcharts, be it your workflows, everything that you're building, because of course your workflows then add up together to make up your process, and the processes then add up to make up the product that you launch at the end of the day. So you have to adopt that compliance by design mindset that ensures that before I can say this design is done, I have to ensure that all the compliance requirements are infused at the right point. All the checks and balances that is required are infused at the right point. So that's what I would say in a nutshell, and that helps you to avoid any risk. That also helps you to avoid any friction with the compliance team, because again, what happens usually in engagement with compliance team is when either side switches onto the resistance mode, then it becomes very difficult for anything that either side is trying to share that might be beneficial to pass across successfully. So compliance by design is the key mindset I would encourage in this case. There is not a lot, so you don't overcomplicate it, but just hold on to that as a key factor, and it really helps, especially in the industry or the organization where I work. By the time we scope normally, and then we then ensure that okay, compliance, please come. We are planning this. This is what we have planned out that we want to do normally. This is how we want it to do. What are the checks and balances? And in most cases, to also throw this in as an aside, we also include members of our data management office. So we introduce them from the planning phase so that we can all agree to the success criteria or success metrics for every project. You get, it makes it easier for everybody to then know. So that, for example, you as a product manager, if you are building out an onboarding form, for example, you might have built out the onboarding form. Of course, your approach is the customer first, right? You build out the onboarding form in a way that customer can probably by the at the click of two buttons or something, or maybe filling out 3 or 4 forms, they've completed it. That's your own approach. But you then need to ensure that compliance by design allows you to then factor in, then bring in all the other teams. Compliance. So yeah, look at this process. To us, would love to get this out to the customer within these few steps. But what are the things, what are the exposures that this could create for us? And then you bring in a data management officer and say, okay, what are the fields that you guys will need? We want to be able to achieve these success metrics. What are those fields that we need to collect that would help you? Because you are the data management team, for example, you are also the data analyst. You also have do some form of data analysis, right? What are those fields that you want us to also be able to collect on this interface, this onboarding form, to help you achieve this? Because for us, we don't want to hear any stories. At the end of the day, when we launch this product, we want to be able to come to you and give you certain data points that we need metrics for from you. That sort of helps you, so that at the end of the day, when the product is launched, or maybe you go with an MVP or MLP, most lovable product, or minimum lovable product. At the end of the day, you know that you have the required data points, then you know that you have avoided fines, even for your MVP, if as much as possible. So compliance by design is very key. Uh, this is almost anti or pseudo, like asking you to stop being true to nature. Because as an innovator, since it's easy to switch into that resistance mode in terms of your mindset, it's easier for you to then think that compliance cannot be fun. It is because they are regulators, they are traditional, they are not sophistication or modernization. But the interesting thing is, as a product manager or as a tech product leader, you can really help by, I think it starts first with breaking down everything that compliance needs or requires of you from the start, again, from the planning throughout the process. Create checkpoints if you can. Checkpoints, I mean, in this case, it could be releases. So we usually break down our releases into several chunks. We could do a major release first, or an MVP or MLP first, and then you can then do incremental releases. So you could decide to adopt that approach and ensure that whatever compliance element of compliance that you're adding in, there's this strong word I always like, and you find it a lot in most of my products that I've built: gamification. You gamify the experience for the customers, right? Or for anybody that wants to interact with that product. So what that means is, if compliance is coming to you with a requirement or something that they are mandating that you include in the product, I think the first thing, probably this would come later when I'm sharing my closing thoughts. I'll be able to build more on this. But you need to have that mindset that, again, it's a partnership, number one. You also need to understand compliance's pain point, because you as a product manager, you have a pain point. You as a developer, you have a pain point. You as a UI UX person, you have a pain point. Wherever you are, wherever you function, you have pain points, and your pain points drive you to do whatever you do. For example, I need to satisfy my customer. What's my pain point? I need to make more money from my product and to make my senior stakeholders very happy, business stakeholders very happy. Right? That's my own pain point. The compliance person needs to avoid fine because that his KPIs are tied to that. So if you forget the resistance motivation that happens to us all naturally, if you're able to move away from the resistance mode and you get to what I call the benefit of a doubt mode in between, where you're able to then see and understand the other person's perspective, you get to see that the reason why compliance mostly comes hard and can be non-intuitive most times, or can be rigid. Let me just use that word because I'm sure it's on the minds of some of us on the call, right? Rigid. The reason why they do that is mostly because they are focused on ensuring that whatever it is we implement as an innovation, a very strong presence of privacy and security in it for the user and especially for the organization. So if you have that at the back of your mind, you then know that, okay, fine, even if compliance is bringing this and mandating this for me, how can I then turn it into a win-win situation where I still get to delight my customers so I can collect their money, but then I'm able to also satisfy compliance. So that is where gamification comes in. So let me try to use an example. One of the initiatives that we launched, I think it was 2 years ago, is savings and contributions. We're trying to get customers to save more. There are two main metrics that was important to me. Contribution completion rate. So for example, if customer buys a plan, a contribution plan or savings plan for like a year, we noticed over time that most customers just drop off on the sixth month and they are not able to complete it. Definitely, they are not able to achieve the entire goal for that savings plan. That's one metric. So I was focused on improving on the completion rate for the savings. The second metric was also that consistency rate was also low. So you see in the entire 1 year cycle, customers will contribute for 6 months. They didn't do that regularly, like January, February, consistently like that till July. You see some who contribute in January and not contribute till maybe March and all at the end of the day. So that means that we had an issue with savings consistency, we had an issue with savings completion rate, right? So how did we solve that, or what did we introduce? We then thought of creating what we call contribution challenges, right? Or leaderboards, sort of a form of customer loyalty feature to give back to the customer or acknowledge the customer and reward them for trying and ensuring that they're able to contribute more. In coming up with this initiative, what did we do? We then engaged compliance and said, compliance, this is what we need. Compliance came up with all their own issues. How would you ensure that customers will not be seeing each other's names and be calling themselves out and will not turn this into a mini brawl and all that? Would you say what they are worried about is invalid? It was, because it bordered on privacy of the customer, data, not just data. Also, of course, it starts with data, right? But again, personality and all these other things, there are several layers to it. So when you get to understand that that is the point of perspective of compliance, it then makes it easier for you to then say, okay, how do I then improve on this? Okay, we then decided to introduce gamification features. So before, instead of going ahead with the contribution challenge that we had earlier planned, we then decided to take a step back and then start by creating what we call contribution streaks. Even congratulate the customer for contributing. And then we had something like a bar, a gamification that then shows them trophy. Yeah, "Hey, you have successfully completed this. Okay, next one." But at the back and in the background, hidden, we were stacking up a leaderboard. And over time, after like maybe three subsequent contribution streaks, we just send the customer a notification, and then when they log into the platform, we just show them something like a trophy, congratulating them. You are within so percentile on the leaderboard. Doing that, we were able to both create a fun um, process or product or initiative for the customer, and also ensure that the pain points from the compliance guys were met. And at the end of the day, we also met our own pain points. So that's how I would put that. I think in Ackerman's side, I know in other fintech and insurtech spaces as well, organizations as well, there is a very robust quality assurance and testing process, especially because they create governance before you launch anything. You could say a bit of it is legacy driven, but again, how do you then make it a bit more agile? So I will tell you that the role that they play is in helping you to identify issues early, pre-production or pre-prod, like we call it, or prod, pre-prod. Pre-prod, it helps you to be able to identify issues early. So if even if compliance has mandated that you should do this or add this there, and you have added it, of course, you carry them along, you have to then test properly. Testing then helps you to be able to identify those issues early, fix them, identify those problem spots that customers are probably going to have so that I can probably rework the experience before it goes out, to rework the, if you say choice architecture or something else. And then, of course, the options. And if it doesn't have any sort of personalization or privacy or security feature, testing then helps you to be able to identify some of those things. Some of the methods that you use, of course, there are several other, there are a lot more, but I personally just prefer the use of what I call dynamic testing. I think our compliance team is also working on adopting something we call a few privacy related test methodologies, but the one we currently use is what we call the DPIA, data privacy or protection assessment. This is really more customer inclined. It helps us to be able to know at what point we might inadvertently be exposing the customer's data or exploiting it so that we still retain that privacy of data or experience or whichever what we're trying to achieve while still achieving or attaining the personalization or level of gamification or whatever that we want to do. But I know there are several other methodologies that you could adopt to help. Talking about tools, there are a few ones. Our QA team, they have quite a lot. I think I was still part of a session where, like, an IT steering committee where they requested for a few more tools. I think that was on Wednesday, and they had come to present and make their request. And I think what I think they had requested for Sonar Cube or something. I don't quite remember, but I know before then they are currently using OneTrust, and of course they use Qualys and some of these other tools. So the advantage of having these tools is helps you to be able to detect issues early, and then when you detect issues early, you can then compile a backlog. So the way you handle your product backlog, you can also have compliance backlogs that you then know that you have to check before you build the final most stable version of your product, right? You keep compliance backlogs as well and ensure that the quality and everything that you are releasing finally to the customer at the end of the day is fully compliant. So that means that even if you might not be able to satisfy everything from the get-go, because you've split it into chunks, you must ensure that at the tail end, by the time you release your most stable version of the product, you have satisfied or met everything that compliance would require of you. So that's really the sort of the approach that we take. Some of these tools, I mean, you can always find them online, but again, the interesting thing is you should always look for the tool, consider price, especially, and then consider use case and how it fits into your organization and your process, most importantly. But it helps you to identify issues early so that if it's not going to work, you tell compliance, see, this thing, like I mentioned earlier on trade offs, can we do a trade off, please? I have timeline, I have deadlines to meet, right? And then, or if it's something that you can then work on to find a way around it. So everybody is happy. So usually what happens is it's always good you establish a common ground. And in establishing the common ground, you have to first of all understand what attains across the regions. You can decide to split it into districts or circuits and however. Understand what obtains, and then once you understand what obtains, you then be able to create It's more like the way you do when you're doing development, where you probably create some um, preferences or user preferences or system settings. There's a way you categorize them where you then say they are, you call some global system settings, and then you call some user system settings. So the user system settings are the ones that are peculiar or specific, particular to the region or wherever it is you are currently at, or in terms of addresses localization. But it's also good for you to have a global compliance view, sort of similar to that global system setting, where when you have that, it then makes it easier for you to sort of try to use one stone to kill multiple birds. But again, before you go in that direction, it's always good for you to compile that database of the compliance requirements across all the regions, have them in a database so it's a global thing. And then from there, you can then start picking out the ones that addresses localization, but it doesn't stop the global framework that you have built by compiling all the different information that you've gathered. And so I think with that, you would then be able to cover some of those issues that might arise due to your trying to diversify into other markets that might not be within your immediate market. So for us in insurance as well, that's one of the things we keep in mind, because insurance, the way it's practiced in Nigeria, is not always the way it's practiced in other places. And it's a heavily regulated industry globally. So we then ensure that. So, for example, AXA Mansard as a global organization, we have, of course, we're in different countries. The way things that are obtainable in Nigeria are different from things that are obtainable over there. But the company has, over the years, been able to build that compliance framework, and they've been able to then know, okay, for the global standards, we have centralized policies that we have created that helps us to address global needs, global compliance requirements, so that we don't fall prey to the law across board. But still in your localities, still find out, create a framework, and then adopt it locally. And then that helps you. And of course, because you have this, your compliance team then becomes a local directory of all the changes in compliance requirements and all that. My compliance team, they are always, in fact, there are a lot of things that they even keep track of more than even we, the innovators. So, say for example, you have standards, GDPR standards. You have NDPR standards as well. Which day was it? I think it was sometime last year, early last year. My compliance guys just wrote us an email in a digital team saying, guys, what's going on? We need our website to be GDPR compliant. But we said, we have made it to be NDPR compliant now. No, no, no. The group is now saying, no, we shouldn't just be NDPR compliant. We should make it also GDPR compliant. Okay, all right. And then we went into scoping and understanding the requirement exactly. And at the end of the day, it turned out to be a win-win for everybody, because today we're enjoying the benefits together as one organization. So um, it's but again, part of it also matters in terms of compiling and creating a global framework. You also have to then consider the high risk regions as well, right? You also have to factor that in, because again, anyway, by the time you start creating your global framework, these are some of the edge cases or things that will drop or come out naturally. You get to see regions that are high risk, those that are low risk, and then you're able to treat them accordingly. So I think for starters, I've shared bits and pieces of part of my closing thoughts earlier, and what that means is innovation versus regulations. As product people, whether you're a developer, product manager, UI UX person, you're an innovator. You're trying to do something that the world has not seen before, trying to create something new, redefine experience, re-engineer processes. Regulation will always be in your way. So it's more like you're saying, my apologies to those of us who are married to using this experience, example. It's more like saying having a necessary evil. Would you say you wouldn't deal with? So the point is you have to learn the ropes. You have to try to understand exactly how to navigate and work with compliance, work with the people that you need to work with. So that being said, I always like comparing compliance or product people and compliance people to, like I mentioned earlier, innovations and regulators. I also like comparing them, product people to modernization or sophistication, while compliance people are the traditional. In another way, let's even try to, I think the topic is humanize, right? Let me even, okay, sorry. I hope this will not be like animalizing, but let me just try. Okay. So again, we know lions and hyenas, right? Yeah, I'm sure some of us have watched the Lion King series, but again, maybe let's not focus too much into on that because, of course, we know that the Lion series, Lion King series, is was designed or scripted along a particular narrative. But if you even look at it in nature, lions and hyenas, they don't like each other. They always fight. In fact, the lion's worst day if he's found in the middle of a pack of hyenas and vice versa. When they get the chance, they kill each other. But if you look at it according to the natural order of things, a hyena is a scavenger, or they fall within the scavenger, and lions are predators. But again, here is the interesting part. Even though they don't like each other naturally, by nature, by behavior, by design, by condition. At the end of the day, the two of them work towards a common goal. So again, let's go back to the mindset of, or cast our mind back to the Lion King series. Scar, that is the one who usurped the throne, actually formed an alliance with hyenas. And at the end of the day, they were successful. They got the throne, but at the end of the day, it didn't last. Right? That's the narrative they wanted to paint there. But again, let's focus on the alliance. The alliance was a strong one, deadly one at the time when it served everybody. Let's go to nature. Why do they form an alliance? It might be very, very, very limited, but they do. When a lion that's a predator kills an animal, he eats the, like they say, the lion's share, eat the large chunk, and then hyenas will naturally flock and eat the rest. At the end of the day, what happens? They both contribute to the decay of the carcass. Yes, you can see other organisms also contribute that part after the lions and hyenas have eaten, right? But they both contribute to the decay of the carcass because any animal that is killed in the jungle must be eaten. So if we focus on the mutual benefits, sorry not to sound like the name of a company, right? The mutual benefits to the organization, to everybody, then it makes it easier for you to work together. And like I mentioned earlier when I mentioned this thing about resistance mindset, it's natural for us to have this resistance mindset. Product people and they will always want to make our lives difficult, governance and all that regulation. Guess what? They also feel the same way about us, product people. Believe me, I have spoken with a lot of them before, and that's the way they feel. They feel like we're always trying to cut corners. You understand? So if we have this understanding, it then makes it easier for us to then try to stay in the middle, try to be the one to pull everybody together. First by understanding the other person's pain points, like I mentioned. Everybody has pain points. Understand the other person's pain point, understand their pain, then it makes it easier for you to factor it in and then be able to work progressively together. Thank you. So I would answer that question by saying, again, going back to my innovation versus regulation. What's the main reason why regulators they always bring the big hammer or a mullet, like I would call it, is because not just because of how they feel, but it's actually the truth. Any new innovation. So not all innovation are non-compliant. Not all innovation are wrong or bad or create an exposure, but the new ones especially need to be regulated. I'm one of those people who stands on that. Otherwise, the exposure will be so great that at the end of the day, it will be difficult to repair the damages. You could say the direction that AI has taken nowadays is a new innovation. Of course, a lot of us who have been in the industry for a long time, we know that there's been different forms of AI before now. It's just even your basic Google search or basic search is a primitive form of AI, right? But it's just that you see, wherever business money goes, innovation always follows, and thereafter, regulation would tag along. So, the way I see the future of compliance is that compliance would always continue to be relevant. It's just that what would happen is that there will be a shift in the compliance practices and the approach for compliance. Because with AI, there's a shift in how you do things nowadays, right? Even in the way you write documentation, there's a shift now in the behavior. There is a shift in the way you think, the way you even do your data analytics and all that. Python and everything has come to help us, right? So the same thing over time would happen in compliance, where instead of going compliance people taking you back to the legacy-driven approach of doing their checks and balances and their audits and ensuring things. By legacy-driven approach, I mean is like today, my compliance team would, for the DPIA process, for example, data privacy, they will pull up one very long Excel sheet that is heavy and have different sheets and have different questions that are written in tiny bits and have check boxes for me. So please, who has that time? Right? But the way I see it going for compliance with AI, especially, they would then get on board that train because it's a moving train. If you don't get on board, you are going to be left behind and you are going to be left in the mud, not just behind. So they would gradually get on board. They will gradually start onboarding some of their processes on. Yes, it might be a shaky start, but at the end of the day, they would catch on and their processes will then be embedded more into or driven more by AI, such that if you are building a product that you've conceptualized and you're using AI to implement it, part of the checks and balances or part of the process would also be compliance and everything. And then in terms of the proliferation of the use of AI tools itself, there definitely has to also be the regulatory part. Again, like I say, there's always going to be the higher part of AI and its proliferation, which is driven by money, business money. But at the end of the day, even the people that are spending the business money, it will get to a saturation point where they will now start seeing that they need regulation and they will then create the alliance to help them to protect their assets and their money going forward. I would say that largely compliance is still very legacy driven. So while I can't entirely tell you that there is a template that you can adapt immediately, I would always want to say that you should consider the peculiarity because compliance also differs from industry to industry. If you're talking about Insurtech now, for example, the compliance there has matured to a stage where yes, even though there's not a plug and play template, but you still have to work with them, the officers directly, the professionals directly. You still have to engage them. So I think probably you should have to keep that mindset right now that compliance people still want to be engaged directly. Otherwise, if they had a basic template that they could that you could get from them, then there won't be any need. But you still need that involvement.